How's everyone doing today? We are back in session after our summer break in July. I hope folks have had a good summer. But we will now begin our board meeting. And apologies for the delay. We had a closed session that went a few minutes over. So we will I'll call the meeting to order at 7:08. And can we start with roll call, please?
Yes, good evening. Chair Abikoga?
Here.
Vice Chair Miller?
Here.
Director Elahi?
Here.
Director Sayok?
Here.
Director Smith?
Here.
Director Sinks?
Here.
Director Corrigan?
Here.
Director Ellenberg? Alternate Director Yulo?
Here.
Thank you. I'll note that Director Bruins, Director Tovar, Director Nunez are absent. We are anticipating Director Gibbons by phone. Unfortunately, she's not with us currently.
So at this time, we do not have anyone on the phone.
Correct.
But we have a quorum. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So I will move on to public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. The public may provide comments on any item not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on non-agendized items? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is our consent calendar. Are there any changes or anything, any items, any board members wishing to remove any items? Any members of the public wishing to remove an item? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Member Ellenberg and second by Member Yulo. Any other discussion? Did you have a comment?
Nope, just ready to vote.
Oh, okay, great.
Want to make sure you all can hear me.
The anticipation. Since we don't have Director Gibbons, I guess, can we do this in oral affirmation?
Yes, you can.
Okay,
Since
great.
there's no one on the phone, it can be done early.
Okay, great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. We'll now move on to the regular calendar, and we will start with the CEO report. We have our CEO, Girish Balachandran.
Thank you, Chair Abikoga. So I'll bring to your attention, you have 3 handouts in front of you. One is the quarterly update on decarbonization programs. We also have a heat pump water heater buyer's guide, and we have the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Strategic Plan. So our staff is providing some sparkling cider to you, and that is to celebrate a pretty amazing achievement of SVCE. The California Energy Commission has awarded us $6 million of grant money for EV charging infrastructure, and you, through your initiatives, have already put in $6 million, so that's a $12 million matching fund total budget. Now, this has been a 2-county effort. I want to recognize Amy Bailey, Justin Zagunis. They basically led the efforts, not just in SVCE, but they had an outsized influence in getting this whole coalition going. We didn't think that we were actually going to get funding this year for Cal EVIP, but through a variety of efforts on our side, but also on the state side, we've been able to get this. It's a total of $33 million for the 2 counties. So it's really a big deal in terms of transportation electrification and basically moving the needle. So I want to congratulate both our staff. Thank you very much, and really looking forward to spending this money.
Great.
So with that, cheers.
Cheers, yes. Cheers to everyone. Congratulations, and thank you. Salute.
I'd also like to move
Sparkling
on and introduce 2 of our newest staff members.
Excuse me, may I
Yes.
get a word in?
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember a television program, Greg, you probably are too, called The $6 Million Man. And it was followed by a TV show called The Bionic Woman. So until she gets a grant more than $6 million, I suggest we start calling Dr. Bailey the Bionic Woman.
Yay. Yeah.
Here's to you.
Great. Thank you very much. So I want to introduce 2 of our newest staff members. First, I'm going to start with someone you know already, Colleen McCamey. She's going to come up and reintroduce herself. She started as a climate fellow, and now she is an employee of SVCE.
Hey, congratulations.
Hi everyone. Well, I'm very glad to be back here, and I'm very glad to be able to work with Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I started out really being interested in energy with with UCSB working with the UC Carbon Neutrality Initiative, and so in doing that, I've learned about community choice aggregation associations, and I was like, oh, this is kind of new, it's kind of crazy, and I kept on following it, and then I saw that there was a Climate Corps fellowship position with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and that I was like, this is what I want to do. I'm so excited, and then I'm even more excited to be here working full-time here. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
And I need to say, she was the one who led the efforts on Bike to the Future
Oh, yes,
Part
that's
2.
right.
Right.
Oh, yay. Congratulations.
I'd now like to introduce Rebecca Fang. She is a base employee. She works for Amy Bailey. She's an associate data analyst, and she has a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from USC, and recently graduated with a master's degree in Stanford.
Thanks, Girish. So hi everyone, my name's Rebecca Fang. Like Girish mentioned, I joined in early July, and I'm on Amy's team as an associate data analyst. So growing up, I grew up here in Mountain View.
Yay.
Mountain View area, Los Altos area, and and I've always been very passionate about the environment and about sustainability, and so that's what drove me to pursue environmental engineering at USC for my bachelor's. And then in college, through my research and through my classes, that's what got me interested in energy specifically. And so that's what drove me to pursue energy in my master's at Stanford. And so I'm very happy to be working here and to be working in my community. And yeah, very excited.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Might I ask, could you help us fill in where these new folks are in our org chart, which departments they're in?
Yeah, so Colleen works for PAM,
Okay.
and so that would be in account services under Don Bray, and Rebecca works for Amy. So Amy has, she has Justin Zagunis, Cal EVIP fame, and
Got it.
Rebecca.
Thank you so much, and welcome.
all right. So I know you've already had a pretty full meeting from 5:30. So in the interest of moving things along, the Legend Reg update is in your packet. The Ad hoc Legislative Committee is going to meet on August 27th. The session just started, so we are going to be reaching out to you between now and September 14th or 13th when the session ends. Doubtless, so there's nothing really has changed. So from our last update that we provided you by email and what's in this packet. But once the Ad hoc Leg Committee meets, you can expect to be called upon. We do expect some bills to be resurrected. So thank you in advance for your support.
Great.
That's all we have in the CEO report. Open for any questions. If not, we can move to the next item.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? No. Any members of the public wishing to speak? No. If not, thank you. And we'll move on to the next item, item 3, approval of the 2020 time of use rate transition for residential customers. And we have our Director of Account Services and Community Relations, Don Bray, reading the presentation. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Chair, and good evening, directors. So our goal tonight is to officially approve Silicon Valley Clean Energy's participation in the time of use rate transition plan for next year. And assuming that we do plan to go forward with that, we also need to approve provision of bill protection, which is basically a safety net for customers that participate, keeping them in effect cost neutral during the first year should they wind up having to pay more under the new time of use rate. We went through this in quite a bit of detail back in February, so I'm going to move very quickly through these slides just as a refresher. If anything jumps out at you, stop me. Otherwise, we're going to move quickly towards the end where we talk about the actual decision we have to make. But this time of use transition is something that's happening statewide. It was mandated by the CPUC, so all three IOUs are participating in this. For PG&E, we are scheduled to be part of the first wave in this transition, occurring in October of 2020, so a little over a year from now. CCAs can decide whether or not they want to be part of this, so there is a decision that we need to make. This is in response to a grid that's really changed a lot over the last 10 years. You're all familiar with the duck curve, and late in the afternoon and into the early evening, energy costs more and it's dirtier because of all the fossil fuel generation that needs to be fired up to support the grid during those hours. Under the current tiered rate structure, almost 87% of our customers are in this category. Customers pay more the more they use. That's really how the tiered rate works, and the logic behind the tiered rate when this was set up was to encourage conservation. And while that's a good goal, what it doesn't do is it doesn't encourage electrification, right? It also doesn't encourage customers to use less during the times of the day when energy is more expensive and dirtier. So how will TOU work? Under the new default time of use rate, customers will pay more between 4 and 9 p.m. every day, and they'll pay less during the other hours. So it's pretty simple tariff to understand. They're going to pay about 20% more during those peak hours during the summer, and about 10% more during the peak hours in the winter. So the way the graph is drawn here makes it look like it's a little bit more dramatic of a difference than it is, but at the end of the day, customers will pay more during those peak hours. There was a pilot of the time of use rate that was done last year. 150,000 PG&E customers were involved in this pilot, including 7,500 customers in the city of Milpitas. And the reason why Milpitas was singled out was that the customers were actually selected into this just before we enrolled them as part of our transition. So the benefit was to us was that we got to really learn how this worked. And it turned out it worked pretty well. We worked with PG&E as part of that process to do several notifications prior to the actual transition of customers. So notifications went out 90 days, 60 days, and 30 days prior to the transition. These notifications are sent by PG&E. Almost all of the notification work and customer support work and such is done by PG&E, but we collaborate and co-brand and the like. The 90-day notification actually gives a customer an estimate of exactly what the impact of the transition will be. It uses their previous year's usage and then projects whether they will make money or lose money under the new time of use rate, and then offers alternatives. So they also present numbers for an alternative time of use rate, because there's more than one out there, and what happens if you elect to stay on your current tiered rate. So you're given quite a bit of information to work with as part of this process. The results were interesting. About 70% of the customers in Milpitas that were transitioned elected to stay on the new time of use rate. About 15% switched to a different time of use rate, again, per that communication that was sent. And about 15% decided to remain on or opt back to E1. So customers have options in this, including staying on the E1 rate. At the end of the day, most will make the transition. Also interesting to look at what the results were in terms of usage. There was some discernible change in terms of how customers used energy. There was about a 5% load shift and some overall load reduction for the graph that you see bottom of the slide. I mentioned bill protection. The CPUC requires that IOUs offer a safety net during the first year. So if you do go on this new rate, and if you do pay more than you would have paid under your E1 rate, you get a bill credit after 1 year. Bill protection is only good for the first 12 months, and then it is wrapped up. But you are covered during that first 12 months, so you can get some experience with how this rate works. We decided to offer bill protection as well, following the PG&E model. And looking at our pilot customers, out of that original 7,500, we had over 5,000 participate. Again, that was the 70% participation rate I mentioned earlier. In terms of moving to the new time of use rate, we had about 300 customers that were eligible for bill protection, meaning that they would have spent $10 or more than they would have paid on the old E1 rate, so they got a credit. And this credit actually applied just a couple of months ago. We had a bunch of customers that were net savers, about 2,600 net savers, and a similar number that didn't really come out any different. It was basically a wash for them, or neutral. So those are what the results look like. If we looked at what the overall revenue impact to SVCE was across the bill protection group, the neutral group, and the savings group, the revenue impact to us was about $13.65 over the course of a year. So if those customers had remained on E1, we would have made that much more money on them. So that's something for us to consider. In terms of the forecasted participation, looking at all of our E1 customers, 208,000 residential customers on E1. Certain groups are ineligible. CARE and FERA customers that are in our hottest climate zones. This is actually a small group for us. Medical baseline customers and people that haven't been at their address for at least 12 months. Again, there's no way to really get a usage history on them, so they're left on the E1 rate if that's what they're on. But all other customers are eligible. And then if we assume a similar participation rate to what we saw in Milpitas, we'll have about 109,000 customers transitioning. The financial impact looks something like this. So we'll have a lot of customers saving money, and that'll add up to about $1.3 million in savings for those customers. We'll have a number that will be neutral, and we'll have some that will be bill protected to the tune of probably $150,000 or so in payments that we'll need to make to bill protected customers. So the overall top line revenue impact to us on the order of $1.5 million. There is a big statewide marketing push that's coming. In fact, some of you may have seen some of this on the airwaves already, but it'll be concentrated here beginning early next year in anticipation of the fall rollout. So in summary, we recommend that SVCE participates in this transition. It offers our customers lower price power when demand is lower and when the energy is cleaner. There's not a lot of risk with this because customers are bill protected if we go that route over the first year. It encourages greater use of renewable energy. It removes the penalty for strategic electrification. This is probably the most important point on this page. And the PG&E portion of the rate is going to move to time of use regardless. So there's going to be a small TOU element in the rate even if we decide not to do this. So we think this is a good thing to do. So our recommendation is that the board confirm participation in the TOU transition, and that the board confirms SVC's provision of bill protection to customers that need it during the first year. We will do a rate analysis next year to to make sure that the differential between the time of use rates and the E1 rates effective next year looks something like what we saw during the transition, or I'm sorry, during the pilot last year, just to make sure that there aren't going to be any big surprises out there financially. Otherwise, the impacts ought to look something like what I presented. So that's it for the presentation. Any questions from the board?
Thank you. Yes, it looks like we have lots of questions. We'll start from this end. So Member Elahi and then Member Sayat.
Thank you, Don. You mentioned the revenue effect of the TOU application. What's the expense effect? I mean, does it cost us less money for the energy that we supply does it cost us more money to supply energy during the peak period, and are we going to have some savings also?
Yes, we should have some savings. A little bit difficult to model that just yet, but yeah, part of the spirit of this is that this should encourage, especially over time, should encourage people to use energy at hours that are less expensive. Now, we also make less revenue because our rates are less. So that's why it's a little bit complicated. But the thought behind this is that that those balance PG&E in doing their rate design for this came up with their rates on that basis. So yeah, it isn't fair to look at this strictly as a cost. There is going to be a correlated benefit.
Yeah, I just wanted to get the net idea. This is excellent that we're trying to save people energy bills and also provide clean energy. Second question I wanted to ask you is the impact the same for
the second question I wanted to ask you is is there any differentiation between residential and commercial customers that we have? Is there a TOU that applies to them also?
Great question. So most all commercial customers are on a TOU rate right now, but what's interesting about it is the TOU peak period is noon to 6, which is not where the peak is on the grid anymore. So next year, there's also going to be a transition of commercial customers, not to TOU rates from tiered rates, but to a new set of TOU periods. So the TOU period for peak is going to move from noon to 6 to, I think it's 3 to 8. And it'll probably be in one of the next couple of board meetings, we'll talk about that transition process specifically for commercial customers. It is going to involve a period where commercial customers can elect to go to this new rate for a year, and then they have to go to it in October or November of next year. So this transition will start for commercial customers towards the end of this year, and it'll be, again, not really to TOU, but to different TOU periods, and it'll be optional for the first year for them.
Thank you.
Member Sayak?
Yes, thank you. Could you just explain, on one of your slides you had CARE and FERA, and could you explain what that is?
So that's a low-income designation, and so if you qualify as a CARE or FERA customer, you pay a lower rate. And so a lot of times when these programs happen, we want to make sure that the impact isn't disproportionate for one group of ratepayers versus another.
So so how does that work? Does it mean that their rates are lower regardless of the type?
Proportionally lower, yes.
Got it.
Just percentage-wise, that's how it looks. And I wish I could tell you what the percentage was, but
no, that's fine. And
probably 30% lower.
Okay. And then the second question I had, notifications, if we were to move in this direction, would we still rely on PG&E for notifications to our customers, or would we be doing our own? Yes,
the notifications all come from PG&E. And again, this was CPUC sponsored. This is built into our rates. And our experience with them was they did a very thorough job of communicating virtually all of the questions that come from customers come to PG&E, and it's through PG&E that you change your rate schedule. So that communication all happens there. We did work on co-branding the messaging, as I mentioned, and that worked out pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any cards? Are you taking comments now or just questions?
Questions now, and then I'll, I
Yeah,
think we have
so
public
I do
comments.
I have some comments, but I'd really respect hearing from the public on their views. Well, if we flip back to chart number 9 in this pilot, and you talked about participation rates. You know, for so many of these things, getting the public, getting a residential customer to respond in any way is so difficult. Was there a default here, and what was that default?
So,
And what fraction of the customers you contacted actually responded in some way?
so this process worked exactly like our enrollment worked.
Okay.
So
you were enrolled automatically in this
yes,
pilot?
all tiered customers, except for the carve-outs that I mentioned, are automatically transitioned.
Okay.
And you get all this information, and then you can elect to go back to E1, or you
Got
can
it.
elect to go to a
So the
different
70% includes those who just didn't respond?
Correct.
Well, just out of curiosity, of all the people households you contacted, what fraction did? Do you have any idea? In any way?
I'm not sure.
Did knowingly participate?
Well,
or
to
actively?
instead of just letting the default kick in, I was curious, right, to see what fraction of folks had any response whatsoever. You don't know?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's really a way to know. Again, we do know that 30% opted to do something. So they either opted to go
Okay.
to a different time of use rate or opted to go back to their E1 rate. The other 70%, we don't really know how conscious that decision was. Yeah.
So I posed a couple of questions to Girish. First of all, what happens to existing rooftop solar customers like me, for example,
So if
when we
you're-
transition to this rate?
Yeah, if you were a more recent solar customer and you're on a NEM 2 rate, you're already on a time of use rate.
Okay.
Over half of our solar customers are already on a time of use rate. And so nothing happens to them. They stay exactly where they are. But if you have been a solar customer for a long time and happen to have never transitioned off of your E1 rate, and we have 5,000 or 6,000 solar customers that are in that boat, they will get all these communications, and they'll be given the option of either transitioning to the new time of use rate or back to their E1 rate based on what works best for them.
Got it.
So it really isn't going to look any different for a solar customer than it does
All right.
for.
And finally, the question I asked Girish yesterday, if under the PG&E plan, does a customer have a choice? Can a customer be on the TOU or go back to E1? Is that going to be carried in perpetuity, or at some point, and when is that point? You know,
So-
is everybody going to be on a TOU?
So new customers that come into our service territory and become customers of PG&E will be defaulted to the new time of use rate. That becomes the new default sign-up
Right.
rate, the way that E1 historically
But
was.
my question is, and also in PG&E territory, or people that elect to stay with PG&E, is there a point at which the other rate will simply
is
never be
no-
offered?
There is no sunset date that I'm aware
Okay.
of on E1. We haven't been told of one if there is one.
Thank
So-
you. That concludes my questions.
Director Corrigan.
Yeah, thank you. Don, how does, so SVCE has led the state CCAs by addressing storage as a component of our energy procurement. How does our ability to store power play into this? And will this incentivize us, or should this incentivize us to continue procuring more storage of power so that we can be able to offer power to our customers? And this question then spirals, as most of mine do, into 2 or 3 additional questions. What does it mean for a customer who has their own power stored throughout the day and can procure their own power? And then what does it mean for us in terms of communicating to our SVCE community about our forward thinking and use of storage?
So things should stay pretty much as they are, at least for a while. And there's two sides to the equation. There's the retail rate side of the equation, which is what we're talking about here. And then there's the wholesale power side of the equation, where energy costs on the grid are just higher during the evening hours. I mean, that reality is going to be with us for the foreseeable future, if not getting worse, just because the duck curve keeps getting deeper. So this shouldn't really materially impact, at least for a while, the steepness of that ramp. Our storage investment should still be worth something into the pretty much indefinite future, I think. If anything, this will help keep the duck curve from becoming an even worse problem than it is. But what we've seen in the pilot is, a pretty modest impact of TOU rates. So, yeah, I think it's going to stay. Our world is going to be kind of like it is today. This is just going to try to nudge it in the right direction. In terms of customers that have storage or solar or more in the way of distributed energy resources, say at their home or their business, they will have additional opportunities or additional options in terms of the rate that they can go on, and they're going to have to determine whether an E1 tiered rate is the best for them, or whether this new TOU is the best, or a different time of use rate. The movement of all time of use rates towards the evening hours being the peak, of course, has had some impact on solar and has prompted more people to think about storage. But that's a broad move that shouldn't be impacted by this.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair.
I'm down to only one question. Everybody got everything. I'm just wondering on bill protection. So there's the TOU rate that they're sort of opted into, but you said they could take a different TOU rate or they could stay on E1. Where does the bill protection apply? Is it only the default TOU rate?
Yes, it only applies to the default TOU rate, and it only applies for the first year.
So
If you go on a different time of use rate, you're not bill protected.
You're on your own. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, Director Yuhao.
I had two questions, if I can remember them, but thank you for answering, already asking some of them. I'm a little confused, Don, because I thought in your base presentation you said that folks that were new that didn't have 12 months of service weren't eligible for this and would be defaulted to tiered. And then I thought in answering a question you said new customers were going to be defaulted to TOU. So which is it?
It's both.
Okay, so I am confused.
So if you are currently a PG&E customer, but you've only been in our service territory for 6 months, right, you're not going to be transitioned. But if you move here after October, after this goes into effect, then you're defaulted onto the new time of use rate.
So are our new neighbors defaulted in at the 12-month mark?
No,
or,
do they? I can't honestly remember exactly the date. It might be live now for all I know. But yeah, if you have to have 12 months of history at your address and be on the E1 rate to be part of this transition program. If you don't have that, then you're not. New customers, as of a certain date, and John, I don't know if you know this, but yeah, as of a certain date, which I need to look up, customers that become new customers are defaulted onto the new rate. Yeah.
So if you're on E1, like you were a 6-month user, you're on E1. After 6 months go, then do you get cut over to the time of use?
Yeah.
You can. You're not automatically transitioned.
So they get.
You're never automatically.
Well, you're not automatically transitioned. Of course, you can if you want to, but no, you're not automatically transitioned.
But they're not going to get notifications or nothing. They're just going to sit there on E1 forever.
Yeah.
Unless they take
there
action.
There could be a follow-on program of some sort to convert them, but yeah. And same is true with the other accepted customer classes.
And then there was a question, Rod's question about the solar customers, and you said if you were on the NEM, you're just going to stay, if you're on a NEM rate, you're going to stay on a NEM rate. I assume that the same is true if you're on an EV rate?
Yeah, if you're on an EV rate, you're on the EV rate. Yeah,
Okay.
nothing will change.
Any other board questions? If not, I will open this up for public comment. Any member wishing to speak, if you could please come up and fill out a card and welcome Mr. Carney.
Thanks. So I think this is a great program. It does an important thing of matching the costs of acquiring power to the price that people pay for it. And to the extent that we can do that, people will make better economic decisions about how much power to use and when to use it. I think that the proposal does a good job in balancing simplicity and accuracy for the way that the grid currently peaks. And it's interesting to know that just over the span of 10 years, the peak is shifted by 3 or 4 hours and may perhaps continue to change over time. I'm a solar customer. I'm on a time of use rate. And one of my questions is, will the model that predicts the costs be accurate for solar customers without storage the same way it is for people who don't have solar? I know that there's certain estimators in PG&E's website that don't work particularly well for solar customers. So that would be good to know. And I have some experience. If James Tuleo were here, he could answer this much more accurately because of his time at PG&E. But PG&E is very slow to close out rate categories. But I would anticipate that at some point in the future, maybe 5, 7, 10 years down the road, the E1 will go away. And depending on how rapidly the climate crisis comes at us, that will probably determine how quickly they close out the E1 rate. So those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? If not, I'll close public comment. And would you mind answering Mr. Carney's question?
Yeah, I honestly can't speak to how well PG&E's modeling tool works for solar customers with storage versus without. But some of you may have used it. You can go onto PG&E's website and you can look at how the different options that you have as a residential customer are estimated to work for you over the course of a year based on your historic usage. But honestly, I'm not sure how well that works for solar customers versus others.
We'll now open up for board comments. Yes, Member Sinks.
Thank you very much. I'm very supportive of this. You know, this helps us moderate peak demand because it sends a signal to customers that they should be using power when it's actually less expensive for us, and that alignment is good. You know, taking a look at the curve on the screen here, even in this pilot, and even over a fairly short time, we've observed from that blue line to that black line a reduction. And that power, at the end of the day, because of the duck curve, is actually expensive for us. Mm-hmm. We've been letting solar plus storage contracts, and the storage part of that, which is designed to help us at the end of the workday, right, is the expensive thing that we're adding. So I think this better aligns our actual costs with what our customers pay. I think that's the first point I would make. The second is it allows us to continue to be competitive with PG&E across all of our rate classes. Were we not to do this, it'd be more challenging. It'd be more challenging to match them in various circumstances, or as we've done, right, be a little under PG&E cost-wise. And finally, it allows us to have consistent rather than conflicting marketing messaging to our residential customers. And I think, you know, that in itself may not be compelling, but it's sure a heck of a lot easier if we're on the same page and people aren't confused because they've seen one thing from PG&E and then they think, well, maybe I ought to be a PG&E customer. If we're on the same page, it eliminates that potential confusion over different messages from us and PG&E. Thanks.
Yes, Director Elahi.
Yeah, I think those are good points, and really would be helpful to get the information on what the cost saving would be in that duck curve portion. If you could get that information, that would be very helpful. The other comment I had is I don't know if there's any specific advertising, because a lot of EV charging is being done at, when the person comes home and they plug the car in. And that may be like 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, and maybe some advertising needs to be done to promote the idea that charge your car after 9 p.m. or run your washer and dryer, I guess, after 9 or whatever else. So I don't know if that's been contemplated, or is that PG&E something that they would do?
Yes, so the, in this example that's shown here, the communications that go out have tips in terms of how to really nail it under the new tariff. So you mentioned clothes drying. Yeah, try to not turn your dryer on between 4 and 9, or put it on a timer or whatnot. Certainly EV charging would be a good example too. So those sorts of communications or tips are included with the communications that go out.
Yes, Director Corrigan.
I like it for all the aforementioned reasons, and additionally that it gets us closer to perhaps even becoming our own rate setter, which has been a long-held goal of mine. So for those reasons, I'm prepared to make a motion if there's no further discussion.
Yes, please.
I make a motion to accept, let me read the exact language you want on this. You got it right there in front of you. I make a motion to confirm participation with PG&E time of use transition rates. Is that how you want it to read? How do you want it to read?
Confirm SVC's participation in the TOU transition and offering of bill protection.
But I think we also want to tie it into a date too, which is October.
For the first
in
year.
October of 2020.
Effective October 1st of 2019. 2020. Wait, I'm telling you, I need it. I need the help here. Thank you.
And do we need to confirm the bill protection piece? Or?
Yes, that should be confirmed as well.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
If you can follow it.
So, let's see, the motion was made by Director Corrigan, seconded by Director Sinks. Any other discussion?
Yeah.
That's okay, I'll give it to Director Corrigan. Any other
I suppose we should make it crystal clear that Director Corrigan intended the additional second aspect of the recommendation.
Yes, I did.
So
And the
would be
seconder as well.
The motion is to confirm SVCE's participation in the TOU transition as of October 1st, 2020, and to confirm that SVCE will offer bill protection for the first year.
First 12 months following
the
execution.
implementation.
Yeah.
Is that clear? All right. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Going on to item 4. This is a discussion item, our first pass at the proposed fiscal year 1920 operating budget, and we have our Director of Finance and Administration, Don Eckert, to do our presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, fellow directors. I don't know about any of you, but talking about the budget after cider is much better than talking about the budget without cider. So, since this is also a topic next month, maybe I'll bring some cider. See how this goes. So just a couple of points before we get into the presentation. One is just for the newer board members. Our fiscal year that we're proposing the budget for is October 1 to September 30th. Just bringing that up as a reminder because that's different than all of your cities or towns that you represent. As the Madam Chair pointed out, this is a discussion item tonight. We're not voting on the budget. And we're looking for your feedback for changes that we can make over the next couple of weeks for the final budget that we'll bring to the board in September. So I endorse feedback not only from the board, but from our ratepayers and the general public. So just looking at our roadmap timeline for the budget. So it all starts with the strategic plan, and we brought the strategic plan for a vote in June. That becomes the first step to decide what we're funding, what's important to us. It's also a reminder to staff as well as to the board that of the mission statement of why we're here and what we are funding. From there, after the strategic plan passed, we went to met with the departments for the next month and a half throughout July and early August, put together departmental budgets. As departments put together their budgets, they also tied out every dollar to a goal in the strategic plan. We then met last week, got some great feedback from the Finance Committee on first review of this proposed budget. That brings us to tonight. We'll sneak in between tonight and the September board meeting another review with the Finance Committee. We'll then take it to the board in September, and our new budget year starts October 1. So if you get nothing else out of tonight, here's some numbers to just keep in mind, take home with you. $318.2 million is our energy revenues. That's a 12.6% growth from the mid-year budget. Keep in mind the mid-year budget didn't include 2 rate changes that we made over the summer. We're anticipating maintaining the rates through the next fiscal year the same. We know that will change, but we'll have a mid-year budget review process that can correct those changes in rates. We're looking at $244.7 million in power supply cost. That's a modest increase, actually, less than 10%. You saw a big jump in power supply costs in the mid-year budget. However, prices have stabilized. We're well hedged going into the next fiscal year. So we have a very healthy operating margin of $56.9 million. That margin funds not only reserves, the programs, capital budget, and debt service. We have a $52 million budget surplus in this proposed budget, and we should end fiscal year 1920 with $150 million in reserves, and that will take us to our reserve target at the end of fiscal year 1920. Considering that I don't anticipate major rate changes next year, and we're well hedged on power supply, we feel very confident we will hit that reserve target at the end of next fiscal year. This next slide is just a comparison to the mid-year budget, just to give you an idea of what is driving the variances. So overall, compared to the mid-year budget of our current budget year, this proposed budget is a $22.5 million increase in the bottom line surplus. We'll go through every box, but just high level, $35.6 million in revenue. So obviously it's a revenue-driven surplus increase. We talked about power supply, but we're well hedged. We also featured the PCC2 impact in this budget, which reduced power supply costs by about $5 million. Our billing and data management, almost the same. Our other operating expenses increased, but the drivers there are professional services. We'll talk about that at a high level with the department budgets, as well as employment expenses. Keep in mind the mid-year budget included the vacancies that we had through the first 4 or 5 months of the fiscal year. This budget includes 25 positions authorized plus 2 that we're going to ask for tonight, and those are funded throughout a full year. Non-operating revenues favorable because of investment income, more cash, better returns, and then transfer to other funds and capital and other expenses includes a formula for funding the programs fund, and that's based on 2% of operating revenues. So as energy revenues have gone up, so did the transfers to the programs fund. Just to cover some of the higher level inputs into the revenue budget. So no change, as I mentioned earlier, in this budget for rates. I know we fatigued the board last year as well as staff with all the various news that we had on rates. And as it becomes, as we know there will be changes in rates and we know that's coming and we have better idea, we will certainly make adjustments to this budget. But for this conversation and for next month, we're going to assume no changes to rates. So we'll maintain the 4% discount in this budget compared to PG&E rates. We're also anticipating no load growth. So we do not have a factor in here for the direct access. That's going to impact us in 2021, not in 2020. So that is coming, but not impacting this fiscal year budget. And then no change to the customer participation rate. So we have been averaging about 3 to 3.5% opt-out. That's been steady since we launched, so we'll maintain that. And just for some of the newer folks, give you a background on the accounts and the accounts that we have and where the money comes from. So we have on average about 267,000 customer accounts per month. As you can see on the chart, 90% of those accounts are residential. But when it comes to energy sales and where the money comes from, about 2/3 of every dollar that comes into this agency is on the commercial and industrial side. And then looking at total revenues, including investment income, $320.3 million in this budget. As I just mentioned, most of it's coming from the commercial and industrial side, and 99 cents for every dollar that comes into this agency is based on rates. And so we are vulnerable to an economic downturn, and long-term revenue will be vulnerable to direct access. What that number is going to look like, we'll know more early next year, but certainly that's a risk that we have to keep in mind. Moving over to power supply, we have $244.6 million power supply budget. I mentioned before, we have a modest increase compared to the mid-year. We've seen a stabilization on prices. We're well hedged, and just to give you a breakout of where the money goes out for power supply. Again, most of it's, 80% of it's either on energy or environmental products. Resource adequacy that we do spend a lot of time talking about and a lot of work on compliance is about 11% of this budget, but that has increased since this agency started. We built in a 3% contingency, and then we do have about 5% built into the power supply budget for CAISO cost, or California Independent System Operator cost, and that's basically to be able to do business and put power on the grid. Our total expenses, including other operating costs, power supply, non-operating costs, $268.3 million. But of note, you'll look at the pie chart, 90 cents for every dollar that goes out the door is related to power supply. So we have very low overhead. We don't have a lot of legacy cost. Allows us to stay nimble in an ever-changing environment. I'll move over to very briefly talk about each department's budget and their initiatives that they're funding throughout next year. In the executive administration, in supporting our CEO and Andrea, focus will be on the strategic plan. I think as we develop the strategic plan for next fiscal year, want to involve the board, possibly a retreat, and probably change the document from maybe being less task-orientated. Certainly we want to continue the legal support in this budget for the PG&E bankruptcy, whether it's through monitoring or strategic action when action is needed. In finance and administration, I'm going to put a lot of money increase into cybersecurity. Nick Zanato does a great job for us through 2 audits that we had over the last 3-4 months on just the IT system that we have, as well as the automated meter infrastructure. But I'll tell you, Nick can run a scan today and have 30 risks. He can fix those risks, and tomorrow run the same scan and have 30 different risks. So it's a never-ending battle, and we want to make sure we fund not just the agency's IT assets, but our customers' data as well. Credit rating, certainly that's going to be very important for us over the next 6-8 months to obtain a credit rating, and we have begun those discussions with Moody's. Facility improvements, you'll see an increase in the capital budget as well as the lease operating expense side as well. Right now, we're getting tight in the current suite that we're in. I think it's time to either relook at whether we go to the 3rd floor of our building or possibly another building within our service territory. So we don't know what those dollars are yet, but these are placeholders to cover that. On power supply, obviously there's the day-to-day operations of power supply, but 2 very important initiatives this coming fiscal year will be the PPA negotiations and funding the proper support. We have concluded the short list, and then the next 6 months or so will be negotiations to conclude that recent RFO that we just issued. But also the 3 PPAs that we signed last year are not on autopilot either. So you have to continue to monitor and work with those suppliers as well to get those to the finish line. And then the integrated resource plan, you've been briefed by Hillary on that the last few months. That certainly is going to be a high visible initiative next year as well. Account services and community relations in Don's area. Obviously, his area does a great job with the outreach and awareness. He also works very much with Amy for program support, and then required notifications that we have to do. On data management, though, that's about a $3.6 million expense per year. That contract is getting reopened next year, so that will certainly be a focus for Don, not just on that contract negotiation, but long-term data management strategy as well. And then in Hillary's area for regulatory and legislative, certainly we want to continue to fund the lobbyists to be proactive with the legislature. Want to have the proper funding to stay involved and supportive of CalCCA initiatives. And then having the consultants to assist Hillary and Poonam with rates, not just looking at the generation rates that impact us directly, but also monitoring the general rate case from PG&E to making sure that the dollars that are in the generation rate are the right dollars. And then finally, we would get to decarbonization and the grid innovation programs in Amy's area. And we've rolled out the program's roadmap. She'll continue to implement that. We brought about 10 or 11 initiatives to have funded this year. We'll start ramping that up. Of note will be programs funding. You'll see a change on the Treasury report, most likely in September. We will move every dollar that was not spent in programs, and we'll transfer it down to a programs fund, if you will. And that way we're not losing those dollars, just dropping them to reserves. Because next year, with the funding that she has approved, as she goes into next year, she wouldn't have enough just with the $6 million. So we're going to move every dollar that's not spent carried over into a programs fund. Let's talk about personnel. Currently, Garish is authorized to fill 25 full-time equivalent positions. As of today, 21 positions are filled. So we still have 4 vacancies. We propose in this budget to adjust the salary tables, the min and the maxes, by 4% based on the latest CPI Bay Area Urban Index that includes San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. You'll see next month when we bring the resolution with the change to the salary tables, you'll see more positions than actually are authorized to fill, and that's just to support the broadbanding concept that we brought to the board last year. And we also want to fund a compensation study as part of the 2-year cycle. Continuing with personnel, this proposed budget would be looking to increase the TO, or table of organization, from 25 to 27 positions. We're looking for 1 position in the decarbonization area, most likely focused on the building and construction efforts. And then we're looking at a rates manager, but we most likely will also put together a job description for a senior rates analyst and figure out which one that we fill. This would be for rates monitoring and forecasting, as well as developing rates in response to the coming of direct access. And just keep in mind, as I mentioned before, 99 cents of every dollar that comes in this agency is somehow related to rates, so it's an important position to fill. And then longer term, we have been talking to the departments. Most likely would look to add another 1 to 2 positions over the next couple years. Unknown now what that would be, but certainly as the environment changes, those positions would be in response to that. We have looked at other CCAs to find out if 27 or 29 is a right number. And surprisingly, we're right in that middle with PCE and Monterey Bay and East Bay and ourselves, that in that 25 to 30 range seems reasonable. And if you look at that from an operating margin per employee, it also supports that number as well. So we feel comfortable with the proposal of the 27. And then we also have in this budget 5 part-time positions funded. This next slide is just a snapshot of our organizational chart, and then in green you would see the changes that we're proposing, the 1 incremental analyst and the rates manager. To cash reserves, so ultimately I mentioned at the start, we're looking at to hit our target for cash reserves at the end of this coming budget, 1920. I added some ranges, so if we're at, instead of 180 days, if it's in that 160 to 200 day range, that's reasonable. And as I mentioned before, one of the initiatives in my area is obtain a credit rating, and certainly the rating agency, seeing that this board supports a budget that would allow us to hit our reserve target will be important. And so just another point to bring out on this chart, in the dark green, you'll see for FY 17 and 18, it's a dark green. Those are actuals. We know that happened. 18-19, we're in August. I know we're going to land in cash a little bit north of 100 million. But in 19-20, we do have some risks. We don't know exactly where rates are going to go. And as we go to 2021 and 21-22, the green becomes a little bit faded as there's a little bit more risk out there. And I'll just remind the board, about 2 years ago, we thought we would be at our reserve target this year. So this is a fluid chart. But considering where we are right now with rates, our current cash position, and where we stand with power supply, feel very confident that we would hit it at the end of next fiscal year. You've seen this chart before on uncertainty and risk. I won't go through all these items because these are the same players that creep up every time, but they're still there. Rates, regulations with Sacramento as well as San Francisco. Certainly any unhedged positions with power supply or any errors in load forecasting can drive up those costs very quickly. There's unknowns with PG&E breakup fee, and we talked about direct access. That takes us to next steps. So tonight we present the proposed budget to you. Any feedback we get from you or from the general public, we'll incorporate that over the next 2-3 weeks. We'll relook at our assumptions in this budget. Certainly want to incorporate the latest mark-to-market on power supply and any new information we would have from rates or requests from the departments, consider those. We want to review then the revised budget with the Finance Committee the day after Labor Day, and then bring back a recommended budget for your approval September 11th. That concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions from board members? Did you have some comments? Okay, okay. So questions? Yes, Director Smith? Okay, we'll just take questions. No questions? All right, then I'm going to go to the public. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? No? All right, then I'll bring it back to the board, and we'll start off with the vice chair, who is also our chair of finance and admin.
Yeah, I wanted to make two comments, and everybody will recognize the comments. First, for our reserves, we set a range, and we have long ago passed the minimum level, and we have our ideal level in the middle, which we are aspiring to, and we have the CEO's super safe level way on the high end, which we are also aspiring to. But I just want everybody to remember we've done a super great job of building our reserves. We've attained a level of reserves that are adequate, and we wish we had more, and the budget does accommodate more, but we are in a very strong position financially with respect to reserves. And just to be double sure, you remember we authorized a line of credit, which doesn't quite, but approximately gets us from the minimum level to more into that little ideal band. So I think we've done exceptionally well, and I don't want anybody to go home and think, oh, we haven't met our reserve level yet. We are substantially in the safe zone. We're just going to get all the way to the ideal zone in the next year. And my second comment is also something I say all the time. The Finance Committee does work a lot with Don and with Garesh to just look at how they're trying to put together the budget and how we're aligning all the strategic plan items to the actual budget and expenditure items. And the discussions for each of the times they bring this budget to us always go over an hour. So we're putting a lot of energy into making sure what shows up here is pretty well thought out and vetted. However, I will point out today is the opportunity to say, oh, you guys, we could add something, we could change something, we should refocus something. This is our opportunity to give the feedback to Don and to Garesh about where we want to adjust this. But I just want to point out it's been very thoroughly vetted. The process has been followed every step of the way, and I think they've done a pretty good job of accurately reflecting all the goals that we had put forth in the strategic plan. And I, for one, look forward to the day when we have a credit rating, we've met our ideal goal and reserves, and we can actually move our programs beyond just the 2% point.
I'm going to go to Director Ellenberg and then Director Smith and then Director Loughy.
Thank you. I feel like my colleague to my right here just rolled out a red carpet for me to make some suggestions. And what I want to share is what I've observed over the last half year now is that we really are a successful and quickly growing startup, and really more than a startup by now, really transitioning to a larger, more complex operation. Certainly the org chart demonstrates that, as well as your interest in additional employee positions. Something that caught my attention, though, is that the positions that we're talking about adding are technical positions, and I understand the focus on that aspect, and as you said, 99 cents out of every dollar is focused on the energy. But to me, I noticed also an absence in the admin side of somebody who really is focused on human relations and personnel issues. And you did have a note, if you can go back to the slide that details finance and administration tasks. I can't see what number slide it is.
11.
Thank you.
Slide 11.
Slide 11. One of the items there does say HR and payroll improvements, and a note, I guess as a goal, to roll out better payroll and HR services. So I'm curious to know if you've given thought to adding that professional on the admin side. If you haven't, I would encourage thinking about it as this organization grows and becomes more complex. So I'll stop there, and I'm interested to hear if this is something that you've already thought about.
You're more biased on the HR side than payroll, right? Just to confirm.
Well, it's often the same person, but HR is certainly, I would say, a particular skill that's needed as the company grows.
So thank you for that question, and I'm going to slide 11. So we are looking at, we currently outsource our human resources needs as well as our payroll. And that's just based on our size and the initiatives of this agency at the time. What we're looking for right now is to improve those services and to actually have an HR person on site during the month. So we're looking forward to that change, some improved services from human resources. To have them actually on site, I think is going to help. We also have a vacant position in our table of organization for administrative services manager, of which there'll be some focus on human resources. I don't, to your point, I don't know what that magic number is to say we should have a full-time human resources person with 25, 26 staff, but certainly as the agency grows and HR laws change, that's going to have to be relooked at. But for now, we do want to adequately fund a human resource consultant. They will be on site, and also better payroll services as well.
In terms of the size of the organization, I would encourage you to look at the comparables to the other energy companies that are around the same size. I would suspect that they probably have somebody who is focused on HR, but I'll look forward to hearing what you come back with in the revised budget. Thank you.
At this point, our chair is going to excuse herself from the room, and apparently she's handed me the gavel, but she's given me dutifully the list on who to call on next. So thank you for those comments. Member Smith. We still have a quorum, though not necessary because these are discussion items.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the comments and questions so far, and in a similar vein, I have a question about strategy 2.1, and which, for those who are listening, it's provide carbon-free electricity to additional customers in the SVC service area and increase market share. So where in the budget, it's not really obvious to me which bucket that goes in, but I am guessing it is account services and community relations.
Correct. Yeah.
And the reason that I'm asking very specifically is that I have reason to go through Santa Clara on a frequent basis. And as you know, they have a long-standing municipal power grid. And what I've noticed recently is unbelievable amounts of data centers being built in Santa Clara. And that made me curious, so I did a quick search. Sorry, and not everything was too riveting to, avoid a web search or two here or there. But in Sunnyvale, we have 8, according to one website, and Milpitas has 1. So San Jose has 21, according to one website. And obviously San Jose is a different market altogether. But I just wonder if we're investing enough in increasing the market share there, because based on the sheer numbers of data centers going in Santa Clara over the last, 2-3 years, what can we do? Does the budget really address kind of some digging deep about what it would take for our service area to get some of that market share?
So I'll address that. So just coming from a municipal utility background, worked with Santa Clara for many years, kind of know some of their history. They actually have been adding data centers for more than a dozen years, right from some of the initial Yahoo sites and things like that. They have the benefit of low-cost federal hydropower. They have the benefit of resources that they purchased back in the mid-'80s, and the debt service on those resources have really reduced dramatically in the early 2000s. So with their low-cost power supply, they also own their distribution system, and so their distribution rate is also less than PG&E's. So from a competitive standpoint, and also from a latency standpoint, the data centers to the users of those data centers, they've just become an amazing place to locate. So it'll be extremely difficult for us to compete. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking out for it. So, but this overall strategy is focused on our large customers who opted out, and now with direct access to trying to get some of the DA customers into our territory.
But if you did a data structure with us, you would be carbon free. And that's a goal of some of these big Fortune 500 companies. And
Yeah,
Santa Clara is not quite there yet.
Some of these large companies also depends on how you get carbon free. Some of our more sophisticated customers are very much in line with the strategies we are looking at, which is the carbon free definition is changing from annual accounting to more hourly, more granular accounting, which is where the industry is headed. So it's a little more challenging to get there.
Yeah, so to wrap up my question regarding this, I'm looking at this account services and community relations block, I guess, or the slide, and I'm not seeing anything related to marketing or strategic marketing or anything like that. So I just wonder if it's in the budget and it just didn't make the slide, or if we're not focusing on it this year.
Yeah, go ahead.
Don Bray's going to come up.
So it should be on the slide. We're spending a lot of time this year working on our strategy for direct access and for reaching out to our largest customers to engage them in conversations around how we can keep them, how we can get them entered into, as we've discussed at a previous board meeting, into longer-term contracts that will keep them, our customers, even if there's a DA option out there for them in the future. So really, it should have been a very specific piece of this picture here.
Yeah, so, okay, great. Well, I look forward to seeing it in updated versions, because it was, you can tell what my background is, because I looked for it, I did not see it.
We'll flesh that out for you, and what the money's, how much money you set aside and what initiatives you got to focus
Great.
on.
Thank you.
By my list, Director Elahi.
Thank you.
I'm batting you to the end, Rob.
I was looking at your slide on, I think it's slide 6, customer accounts and energy sales. So 90% of our customers are residential, 9% are CNI, but the sales are 64% to CNI and 34% to residential. I was curious if you have a breakdown on the cost that for residential customers, you have a pie chart or something that shows how much money, what does it cost to service the residential customers, and what it costs comparatively to service the CNI.
Yeah, we do have that analysis of margins by customer class. It's different for each group. I'll include that for next month.
Okay, great, thanks.
Director Elo.
Thanks, Howard. Girish and I usually, we agree on most things, but we disagree on the thing I'm going to say now, which is, and can you call up slide 20, please? What I'm requesting is that staff consider how to prevent the reserves from getting too high. And that almost sounds like I'm making a joke, but I'm absolutely not. I view those reserves above the blue line as a problem. And by that, I'm remembering Proposition 13. Again, my gray hair tells me I'm old enough to remember that. When certain parts of our government accumulated too much reserve, and the population wasn't happy with that, and voted for some pretty massive tax overhaul, which we're suffering from still today. And so I want to make sure that our agency is never in a position of having too much reserve and could be accused of having an unhealthily high level of reserve. And the reason I bring it up now, even though we're just thinking about next year getting to that, is that I know from the last 2 years of working with us all, it takes us a while to figure out how to do stuff. And it seems to me there would be easily 3 competing ways of attacking, if you will, that issue. One would be reevaluating our reserve policies and what's prudent. The second would be adding to our decarbonization programs budget. And we know that takes a long time for us, A, to figure out what we're going to do, and even longer for us to spend the money. And then C, of course, lowering our rates beyond the low rates that we are currently offering. So I would hope that staff could think about that. And we kind of need to start in January, I'm thinking, on that, or else we're going to be out of balance far too soon.
And you forgot, D, invest in projects, E, invest in our own facilities.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of things.
Yeah. But we should figure that out before it becomes a problem.
I think it's a great point. I disagree that we disagree on this.
Okay.
So I think it's great. We have, it's a static assumption that we're using. And so, especially your last point about rates, that's a very quick fix that can change this in no time. So we will bring it back to you right around that first quarter of next year and tee up options on
Thanks so much.
with it.
Great. Prevent our reserves from being too high. That's my note. Director Corrigan.
I'm good.
Oh, I'm going to take you off the list, but I did my duty. Director Sinks.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with the disagreement to disagree, I guess. I think there are a lot of things that the state or the PUC could do, and just looking at actions in the last year, 18 months, that could wipe out our reserves in a relatively short time. And we don't know what the bankruptcy court's going to do. There are a lot of risks. So I am supportive of building up to in that max range someplace. And yes, as is noted, it's awful easy to give money away in the form of rates. It's harder to give it away in programs, but we're going to do our darndest. And, I just have to, hats off tonight to Amy and company for getting to this marvelous thing where we're getting matching funds. Now we have some real money to apply. The Air District, I sent them the note, and they were astonished that we had succeeded in doing this. Now maybe they'll take a page from your book, but I think that we really do have to be mindful of the fact that there are a lot of variables in this business that are just not in our control. Direct access, all of these things add up, especially with where we are. I'll make that point, and I'm cheering this cash reserves picture. I'm liking it, but yeah, I mean, at some point you have to make sure that you're not just collecting money to sit on it. And I think what I'd respectfully ask staff to do is help us understand the impact that some of these actions could have and how quickly our reserves could disappear, right? And we have discussed some of this at the risk committee, as you know, right? The second thing I wanted to just ask about is the compensation study. So can you say a little bit more about, remind us what is our 2-year cycle and when does this data come to us? I'm very sensitive to the idea that we're in a very competitive labor market, and we want to be sure that we're retaining great employees and able to attract new ones. And part of the way we do that is to make sure that we're paying to market.
So when we overhauled the benefits, you may recall last year, part of that was also a compensation study to look at not just CCAs, but publicly owned utility, as well as another JPA that's involved in energy. So we had a pretty good mix of folks to compare to. And then we look at it from a, what's the range, include other benefits. Some have Social Security, some have pensions, we have like the HRA, and include all those benefits, so it's an apples to apples comparison. And then provide a report to the Finance Committee next summer.
I see a year from now.
So
okay.
With the overall goal is to make sure that we're staying at market, being competitive as well.
Yeah, I think it's so important in this market that's shifting rapidly, and I just like to support Director Ellenberg's idea that we ought to be thinking about HR, and not necessarily pulling it in-house, but I could be very supportive of that too. If you got to a point where you could hire a good HR generalist that could make sure that our benefits are competitive, that could make sure that we're paying to market on an ongoing basis, not just waiting 2 years, to make sure that we're looking out for goals of wanting to hire and retain a diverse workforce. And by that I mean not only gender. We've done a great job with gender. We have 3 of our directors are female, for example, but we have age diversity that we care about. We want to have employees that represent our communities in age and ethnicity and everything. And so sometimes I think a good HR person can be helping us look out and making sure that looking out not only that we're compliant, but making sure that in our hiring and retention that we're being fair and equitable. Somebody with that background that knows some statistics and has some background might really keep us humming merrily along. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think this is a great organization you have. I was proud to introduce John Supp to our City Council Montecito, where he presented the REACH codes to us, and say that on the record that Silicon Valley is composed of great individuals. You guys do a good job. On the question of reserves, I think Director Yulo brings up a good point. At this point, there is obviously a need for the reserves. Because you are in a startup mode, you have the PUC issues, you have the PG&E bankruptcies, but in the background at some point you've got to kind of take a look at it. And my thought also is that something you may want to consider, this is Silicon Valley, real estate really is appreciating and is probably going to keep appreciating, is to invest that and purchase a property You're going to be paying rents for a while. You're, $10,000, $20,000 a month or whatever. You could buy a decent-sized building for yourself, and it would be a good place to, put some of our reserves and also not have to worry about the rental increase that's going to happen every year in this valley, and it's going to become. It's already kind of ridiculous, but it's going to get worse. So you may want to consider that also. Thanks.
All right, I've heard from everybody whose name is on the list. Who am I missing?
Can
Tony,
I
go ahead.
Offer just a different view on the HR professional perspective, which is I would hope that the board could continue to be interest-based in thinking about making sure that our HR policies and practices are market-based and up to market, and that we're taking care of everyone without necessarily suggesting that hiring a person is the only way to do that. That's certainly one way. I'm just not sure it's the best way, and I want to let the CEO just look at the interests that we have and are set up for the organization and look at the best way to meet them.
Employee or otherwise?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? Some people have been conspicuously quiet. Okay.
Are we at announcements yet?
No, we're not up there. Let me. So, yeah, we gave a lot of feedback. Here are the notes that I took, just for completeness. If somebody thinks that I'm missing something. So the first note we started with was HR. If I collected what everybody said, it did appear as though there was some need for on-site. There was this market-based element to it. There was a whole discussion of benefits, pay, reviewing our policies, help in hiring, diversity. So I think we're feeling that the organization is big enough that we probably need some more focus and attention in the HR professions. Did I leave anything off the HR list?
If I may, sorry.
Please.
I think Tony expressed something that it's the interest of making sure we have an effective organization, whether it's equity in hiring, making sure our benefits are market-based, etc. I am sensitive to the number of people we put in. One thing that we mentioned in a past meeting is we've hired an expert in HR there are many small companies whose only job is to come into companies with employees of less than 100 and basically help us with HR issues and benefit issues. So this is the company that we hired to get us through the whole benefits review.
Yeah, we didn't specify an answer.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that that's part of our...
Yeah, these were the parameters.
Good.
And I think that, I know they did the benefits review. We're suggesting that maybe they do a few more of these sorts of things in the coming year, which could have a budget impact if we're asking for more time.
Yes.
Okay? Okay, there was this discussion under account services, and we do fully understand that there's a big goal on DA, but I think the expression was that there are more goals than just DA. And so we wanted some money, time, introspection into the marketing and other opportunities in addition to just DA. Accurate? And then there was a request for sort of a cost/margin of service of residential versus commercial.
By class, yeah.
Get a little bit more introspection there. And then the reserve discussion was actually, I thought, put in a good spot, which was at some point in the future, we may have too many reserves. And as you stated, January, which would be the next budget cycle, we ought to have more discussion about how we're going to tail off our budget reserve growth. Everybody noted, hey, we're under a lot of unknowns. We feel more comfortable with money in the bank. I would feel more comfortable with money in the bank and a great credit rating. Hint, hint. But I think that there's this thought that we should be looking in the next budget cycle, not so much this budget cycle. What are we really going to do? There was a suggestion about potentially buying a building. There was my thought about more programs. There was the thought about, and I'll phrase it the other way, Rod, taking less money from our customers, not giving it to them. But none of it was for this year. It seemed like this was sort of like next year. Is that an accurate way to phrase that? Next year's budget, we're doing, yeah. The 2020 2021 budget cycle, not the 1920 budget cycle. Those were the notes that I had. Does anybody have anything that I may have missed?
You know, I'll add just one thought, and you touched on it about having a great credit rating. I was asking why we need a great credit rating. It's not like we're going to be looking for large amounts of credit, but it really goes to our ability to negotiate contracts. So as we continue to put out contracts, correct, for solar plus storage, wind, other renewables, whatever it is, once we have this rating, and to the extent our rating is strong, we can get better terms for these than we could otherwise, and that really does make a difference in the bottom line. So that was instructive to me, and I just wanted to share that out of some prior meeting I had. Thanks.
Okay, so that was all I had. Is that fair? Then I think you have feedback. We look forward to the final budget to approve in a meeting near us soon.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, next up is our REACH code update.
Stand.
Okay, great. Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. So John and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation on the REACH Code initiative, and we promise we'll keep it brief. We just wanted to start off by providing a bit of, I have to slouch down a little bit to get to the microphone. Yeah. We just wanted to provide first a bit of background and context to get everyone, refresh your memory on how we got here. But really the bulk of the presentation is by John, and it's deep diving into our REACH Code effort briefly, and then where do we go from here. Okay, all right. So as you all know, we are in a climate crisis. These are screenshots of news articles from the morning of August 5th. Which was the morning that I was putting together these slides. Every week there are news, it seems like really an acceleration of studies that are coming out showing really the full breadth and depth of the climate crisis. And you and your cities formed us, of course, to help tackle this crisis for our community and for the global community. And we outlined, what our plan is for achieving deep decarbonization through the board-adopted Decarb Strategy and Programs Roadmap, where we also set emissions reductions targets that really sets us on the trajectory for achieving science-based emissions targets. The overarching strategy from that roadmap is kind of listed here and has three parts. First, offering carbon-free power. Second, electrifying everything, specifically buildings and transportation, such that they're operating off of that clean electricity. And then do that while promoting energy efficiency and successful grid integration. So this is the formula that we're following. And the REACH Code effort really focuses on this second step, electrification of buildings and mobility. And just for a little bit more context, as you know, the Decarb Roadmap was adopted by the board last December, as was the REACH Code effort as a component of that. Since that time, the landscape has changed pretty significantly in a really positive way. We have over 50 cities across the state that are currently evaluating REACH codes for this upcoming building code cycle. And for context, typically in a 3-year building code cycle, you maybe have a dozen maximum, typically less, typically fewer cities actually adopting REACH codes. So this is 5 or 6 times the normal kind of level of local action. So you have a huge number of cities really ready to kind of demonstrate leadership. And I'm guessing you've also heard by now, around a month ago, Berkeley did adopt a natural gas ban in new construction for multiple building types. So this was really a big moment, in part because of that last bullet point as well. PG&E actually did show up in person to the city council meeting in support of the gas ban. And that was the first time that that's happened. And so that was a pretty big deal. They've also offered to show up to our council meetings in support of our REACH code effort as well. But really kind of the stage is set for, I think, an avalanche of local action.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, directors. Again, John Supp, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Manager of Account Services, and I've really been working the point for the REACH code effort. So as Amy mentioned, we are experiencing a lot of climate impact, and clearly all the cities have goals, so we need to be taking action. We've already mentioned Cal EVIP, we have the heat pump water heater initiative, and here we have the REACH code effort. And one of the big keystones, cornerstones for the REACH code effort is the benefits that are associated with all electric buildings. Safer, healthier, lower cost. So all those things really are pointing in this direction of decarbonization being an effective pathway, not just for the environmental benefits, but also for the economic and health benefits of our residences and businesses. And as many of us are driving electric vehicles and we notice the difference, the REACH code efforts is also about encouraging additional adoption and support for lower emission vehicles like electric vehicles. And I think the last thing that I think is a key point on this is really about the fiscal prudence of what we're doing. So if the goal is at some point to decarbonize, every home and every business that gets built today with natural gas infrastructure is actually creating a new future problem that we're going to have to find a way to resolve. So if you build a home or business and you add gas, you're adding methane leaks upstream, you're adding combustion within that building. So by taking action sooner rather than later, we're actually going to make our improvements and the ability for us to affect this much simpler. So there's a lot of people involved in this, and I want to acknowledge the directors up here who have been incredibly important in encouraging your city staff members to participate and really look at these REACH code efforts and be engaged and involved in them. Quite a few different groups from sustainability, economic development, building and planning, as well as external stakeholders. So it's a bit much for just Silicon Valley Clean Energy given our relatively small staff level. So we contracted with some consulting experts who work on REACH codes, and that's TRC along with DNVGL. And then in order to help support some of the local stakeholder engagements, we also contracted with Joint Venture Silicon Valley to conduct additional engagements with affordable housing, labor, real estate, developers, and so on, so that we could gather as much input as possible as we're shaping our shaping the REACH codes. So right now we're in one of those 3-year cycles. Your staff is right now engaged in a very large effort, which is to look at all the different codes that are involved in the new cycle. But the REACH codes themselves are really focused on just 2 parts: the energy, what's powering inside the building, and then Cal Green Part 11, which is what deals with electric vehicle infrastructure. And from a timing perspective, again, it's really important. Your staff is already working on this. So by inserting the REACH codes at this time, it really minimizes the amount of additional work that the city staff members have to do for this. For the REACH codes, we wanted to emphasize this point on the all electric buildings. There is no REACH code for all electric buildings. The recommendation is to adopt the California Title 24 code for all electric buildings at just the base code level. And that really is what allows us to preserve the lowest cost construction option. I know we're all sensitive to housing costs and building costs in Silicon Valley. So we wanted to make sure there was at least one pathway that had no additional incremental cost to construct. And again, as we remember, that's the healthier, safer side of it as well through the all electric. For dual fuel buildings, these are using natural gas and electricity. The recommendation is to adopt the 2019 code with modifications. So one is to include pre-wiring for future electric devices. So if you are going to put in a gas stove, there's also going to be an electric circuit nearby. If you're putting in a gas dryer, there will be an electric circuit nearby. That way, at some point in the future, the cost to make that transition is so much less to do so. It's about 5 times less costly to do this at the new construction phase than it would be to try to do it at the retrofit phase. And I would like to acknowledge one of the council members, or excuse me, one of the directors who acknowledged, what they're going through when they look at some of their homes to do these types of retrofits. If we had these pre-wirings in place, it would make your own retrofits of your own homes much simpler. And then in support of things that we'd heard earlier about the impact on the grid, as we look at residential, if you're doing that dual fuel side, the recommendation is to also encourage or require something like battery storage to be placed along with it. That's both going to maximize the solar that's already required as part of the code, as well as give additional resiliency and energy during these planned outages that PG&E has announced. On the EV charging side, the code already stipulates for different building types a certain quantity, speed, and readiness. Given that Santa Clara County is, if not the leader, it's certainly one of the leaders in EV adoption rate. So whatever the base code is just not really going to reflect what's already happening here. As somebody who moved here from DC, I can tell you right now, it is not normal to see the number of EVs that exist in this area, where once I saw a Tesla per year, I see them per lane, which is really exciting. And again, I want to emphasize with the infrastructure side of it, constructing EV charging during new construction, again, saves 2 to 5 times the amount of money it would be to do it as a retrofit. So if we just do the right levels today that meet the needs of our local community today, it actually saves society a lot more money, right? Spend $5,000 today to put the infrastructure in rather than $20,000 to $30,000 to do it later. Because we know in this area, people are going to be wanting to drive them. So what's been happening? Again, I'll acknowledge, I want to thank you all who have been really supportive of this effort. I wanted to put a little update on the engagement. Caveat, this is the engagement that we're aware of. We do know for a fact that many of your city staffs are engaged in internal meetings, in internal discussions that we're not involved in. I want to focus your attention on the left on the letters of intent. The board, you approved having $10,000 available for grant for cities to help defray some of the costs associated with investigating the REACH code. On the table here, you can see that there are 9 letters of intent that we've received. But I want to give some last minute updates. As Councilmember Elahe alluded to, he invited me to speak in front of the city on August 6th. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the council resolution in Montecito was to sign a letter of intent and continue to have staff pursue a REACH code for this cycle. So that's excellent news. So that's one more check in the letter of intent phase. And while I was returning from San Francisco from a meeting up there, it turns out another, if the record may reflect, another letter of intent materialized. So we are holding another one, and this one is from Saratoga. So now 11 of our 13 member agencies have formally recognized that they are pursuing REACH codes, and so we are extremely excited about that. Over on the right-hand side, I'll jump over there. What this is ultimately leading to is that we need to get these REACH codes in front of your city councils, once for a reading and then once for a vote. And so I saw that. I saw those hand movements there. We can update that. So, no. But your staff has been wonderfully supportive of this effort. So we'll figure out a way to bridge that level of effort. Fantastic. So it's really getting that, it's getting these REACH codes inserted into the building codes that you're already, as council members, going to be voting upon. And in the middle of this is a lot of activity. We've been engaged with your city staff, with many of your city commissions, as well as doing briefings for the council. So this level of support is not over. We're right in the thick of it. So where do we go from here? Well, I think it's really simple. In the beginning, there was a lot more work on the consultant and on the SVCE staff side, right? We were prepping the REACH code, getting the input, developing the models. Now we're at this handoff phase where it's up to the city staff with our support to make that recommendation and bring that recommendation to you all for your review. Engage the stakeholders in your community, bring that final recommendation to you for a vote. That's really where we are here today. So this is really crunch time. And again, I want to point out, even below that highlighted area, Even once you all adopt the new REACH code, our support continues as we will be providing training and support checklists and other tools that will help your city staff actually execute on the REACH codes that you adopt. So leading up to this council meetings, I can't reinforce strongly enough how available we are and how much we want to continue supporting your cities. And that's doing the briefings, the study sessions, being at your meetings and answering questions. In addition to that, we are involved in a few other regional activities. There are some electrification expos to help you all learn more about what a decarbonized or all-electric building would look like. We are participating with and highlighting some local all-electric developments through the Silicon Valley Business Journal Structures Award. We are separately acknowledging additional all-electric buildings that are already here in our service territory. We had about 20 all-electric buildings apply for our showcase grants. Super excited. A few of those have already been, we've made some sheets on those that we can share. And finally, we have a homes tour that's going to be forthcoming for all electric homes. So how do we wrap up? Well, what we're asking here today is that if you're already engaged in this, just remind your staff, keep tapping us for additional support, keep the momentum going. Find out when you're going to have that vote, make sure that we're available, make sure that a recommendation is coming to you. If you're not in that same space, we don't have to have a show of hands right now. It's not too late, because at the end of the day, the early parts of this were getting your input to shape the recommendations. The recommendations now are shaped and they are ready to go. So there is still time for those of you that are on the outside looking in, because the draft code language is in place. The infrastructure to run stakeholder engagement meetings is in place. So if you need to get on board, let me know, and we'll make sure we can get your member agency on board. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with questions, and I have the first one for you. Pre-wiring is important, but the biggest cost in my house would have been a couple $1,000s to give me the 220 for my hot water heater, but it was the 7-inch vent pipe, which would cost $10,000. Oh. So, because I have to cut this big, huge pipe through the house where I only have a 4-inch vent now. Does your code include pre-plumbing, or is it only just the pre-wiring?
Great question. So can you describe the plumbing that you're referring to?
The plumbing is the vent, right? Because if you do a hot water heater, heat pump hot water heater, it has to suck in a massive amount of air from the outside to extract the heat from. And a 4-inch vent is not big enough for that.
So if I may, maybe a slight clarification on that. So the heat pump to be installed needs to have access to unconditioned space typically, although it can be something like a laundry room, mud room, or a garage. So it doesn't specifically need to be sucking in air from the outside. So
well, it's unconditioned from the outside, but it's 7-inch venting that you need coming and going. And you can get your air from the unconditioned space, but it's got to go someplace, and you can't put it back into the same space. Just because I lived all this, so I'm just wondering, you don't have to get into all the details. Is it in or is it not in? We can work from there.
So it is, what is written in right now is an optional code language, which would then give you so the language is there. It's up to your city to pick the language. That would say that you need both the physical space to address the needs of the unconditioned air. Okay. And so as written, it would be something like 700 square feet, or 70. Well, I'll take a look at it. Okay. But yeah, the square footage is written in there, as well as there was an additional request to make sure that there was a plumbing home run that would lead you back to that place for certain homes that are currently building with multiple tankless water heaters, right, where there isn't currently a central location where the water would be running. We are currently updating the language to include that as well.
Okay, excellent. Okay, then I'll go to everybody else who wants to start. I guess we'll start with Rod. We'll work our way over.
Thank you very much. I appreciate support that SVC has given to my city staff and understand.
So we are in the questions phase, just in case we're going to comment second.
I'll be very brief and then I'll be done. So August 29th, I know your consultant is coming out with ours to advise our sustainability commission. What happens about what happens to projects that have been entitled before we adopt new building codes. If we have projects that haven't been fully architected, but they have the developers received an entitlement, at what date do our new codes become effective, and how do they work back into these projects somewhere betwixt and between?
So as currently planned for most of the cities, they would be adopting the new code, including a REACH code, as of January 1st, 2020.
Okay.
So projects that already have a permit prior to January 1st, 2020,
so the permit is the permit is the thing. Just receiving an entitlement isn't the ticket. It's having pulled a permit prior to January 1st.
That may be a distinction that I'll have to double check on, if you have that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll double check that.
Just trying to understand that, and then for those that may or may not have, could apply, could either adopt under the new rules but have the discretion to work through old rules. Who do we send them to? Is there somebody at SVCE to help walk them through this process? I'm not talking about an individual homeowner necessarily, but for a larger project, who's the best point of contact at SVC when I say, hey, we just approved your hotel now? It's a big project. Who can they turn to at SVCE for some advice?
Well, I think the first thing we want to do is make sure that we know whether or not the new code would be even applicable to this project.
Yeah.
If it's not applicable, and we can find that answer relatively quickly by speaking with our consultants. So we'll make sure to have that answer. If it's not applicable, there's really no need to move forward. If it is applicable, then we certainly could include some consulting time to make sure that we can answer those questions. So I'm the point person for that type of request.
Okay.
So if I want to make sure I just receive that information, we can take action on it.
That's terrific. Finally, if a project has received ministerial approval, such as under state law SB 35,
For example.
For example.
Asking for a friend.
Lifeline. Call my lifeline. Do you know whether, so is it really, I mean, this all goes into what is the thing, right? I guess if a permit has been, if a building permit has been pulled prior to the first, then there's apparently one course, and if not, then there's another. So
yeah, and I think I want to add another resource in there, which is your chief building officials who know this information, live this information.
Yes.
We certainly can consult to make sure, but they've in general, these code cycles happen every 3 years.
Yes.
And so there is very likely going to be a large stack of projects that try to submit for approval before any new code cycle goes into effect.
Or maybe
so there's
not,
usually a
right?
nice December rush and then a sort of a lull.
Okay.
There is one little note on that, which is this is the first year that all electric design is the most well supported by the code. So there are actually a small group of projects who are designing for all electric, where it is actually advantageous, likely, to actually wait for the new code rather than trying to go under the old code.
That's fascinating. And you know, that component of education, whenever we change something and people are worried that we're imposing more regulation, actually this could be economically helpful to a developer. So thank you so much.
So I just want to follow up on your statement that it's not too late for those municipalities that have not engaged. Could you follow up on what exactly that means? In the scenario I have, October 15, Los Gatos will do our first reading on building codes as is. How many suggested changes could someone from SVCE provide? Is it complex? Is it simple so that during the discussion those could be incorporated, or is it something that a municipality has to be engaged with now so that there's no surprise at the hearing?
Yeah, I think the way I'd answer it is it's going to be important to have a little bit of lead-in time with your building official or building staff or sustainability or whoever the appropriate people are. The quantity of language that we're talking about is actually relatively modest. Considering all the stacks of books that are associated with the code, I think we're looking at a total of maybe, for the buildings, maybe 7 pages. And those are, again, broken out into different building types. So it's actually sort of modular. So a relatively short meeting with myself and some of the consulting staff can sort of get your city staff into a reasonable level of familiarity with the REACH codes. Separate from that, all of our activities and information are on the SiliconValleyReachCodes.org website. So the language itself, the webinars that we've done, certain flyers and certain other pieces of information are out there as well, so they can peruse that. Between that meeting and your first reading, it's advisable to have a stakeholder engagement about the proposed REACH codes, for which we would be able to support both the meeting itself, provide the content as well. So I would say, please, if you have somebody who you know that might be interested, please have them contact me, or I will contact them, and we can begin that discussion. But definitely not too late.
Never too late. Any other questions? Seeing none, I do have a member of the public that does wish to speak. Bruce, come on down. Maybe Bruce has time to visit Los Gatos.
I have visited Los Gatos. It didn't work out that well. But when a new mayor comes into office, perhaps it will work out better. I'm Bruce Carney, and I'm speaking on behalf of Carbon Free Mountain View, which is one of 3 environmental organizations, actually 4, that I am a member of, that are all quite interested in helping move the REACH code initiative across the finish line in as many cities as possible. So let me just tell you who those groups are. So there's Carbon Free Mountain View, Carbon Free Silicon Valley, the Santa Clara County chapter of the Climate Reality Project, and Menlo Spark, which has created a fossil-free buildings campaign as an adjunct of Menlo Spark's effort to make Menlo Park the greenest city in Silicon Valley. So taken all together, there are probably 25 or 30 activists who belong to one of these 4 organizations who might be able to do something like attend a meeting, speak to city council, say this is a great idea, rally high school students from communities to say the same thing. So I would request the kind of information that's in the slide deck, the green columns, where public input needs to help energize the right decision, that staff work as closely as possible and communicate as frequently as possible with the activist groups so that we won't miss the opportunity to be in the right city at the right time. Given the very compressed time frame that we have, it will be hard to get people to the right places unless we have at least a week or 2 lead time. One of the earlier slides showed the audience at Berkeley when they banned natural gas in new buildings. There's a lot of interest among the activist community to have other cities do that. And my understanding is that what Berkeley did is completely outside of the REACH code. It was using what are called the police powers of a city. And I don't know if only charter cities have those police powers or if general law cities also can do that. But that may be one solution for Los Gatos, where the town probably doesn't have the time or the leadership right now to get the REACH code adopted. But it could do what Berkeley has done. And to have a small town follow that lead, I think would be a tremendous step forward for the West Valley. Lastly, I wanted to let you all know that there's a meeting at the Quinlan Center here in Cupertino Sunday afternoon from 3 to 6. It's the youth, I'm going to get the name wrong, the Youth Climate Activists. So these are the local high school and community college students who realize that their future is at risk, and they are going to be planning for a student climate strike in late September that will energize students from all around Santa Clara County. I believe the actual event will be in San Jose. And I think that it would be a great thing for city council members to attend this event this coming Sunday at 3 o'clock to show your support for the future that you're trying to create for the youth of your communities, and to provide advice to them about how they can be effective advocates. One of the things I've observed in my working with kids from Cupertino High School in particular is that their focus is on national issues. They want the Cupertino City Council to endorse the Green New Deal, even though we don't really know what the Green New Deal will consist of. But if they were to focus more on local issues, perhaps it would be more that the Cupertino Council or the other councils could do to show them that they care and they're taking action. So the REACH Code is certainly an opportunity to get student involvement and to make connections with a portion of our communities that don't often come to meetings at 8 or 9 o'clock on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other comments from the public? Come on, you turn in a card later so the staff knows the name and everything.
I'll fill in a card.
Yeah, no problem.
In a moment. Hi, my name is Brian Mekachuk, and I'm with a citizen of the city of Monte Sereno. And I'd like to say John did a great presentation last week, and that was really well received. And I thought what I'd give council is a little bit of feedback on, I'll give the board a little bit of feedback on what was said at the council meeting, at our council meeting. One of the issues was creating penalties instead of incentives. So that was an issue with some of them, whether they want to adopt something that makes it higher, more costly to go with all electric. Another person pointed out that if electrification is a lower cost, then let the market move to electrification. But I think everyone's a little slow on that, and there has to be some sort of incentive to move quicker. But that same person, or then another person said, the cost of electricity is probably going to go up faster than the cost of natural gas. So if you're saying that the cost of an all-electric building is lower than a mixed fuel building, then that's going to go away as the cost of electricity goes up. So one of the things was that the city of Monte Sereno did like the $10,000 grant to sign the letter of intent, so they moved fairly quickly on that. So that made it low risk for them. But what they also did was they said that they wanted input from the citizens of Monte Sereno. So what they want to do is have some sort of outreach, and I'm volunteering to help with that. And at the time, and even earlier today, there were blanks across Los Gatos and Saratoga, and since Monte Sereno's in the middle, if we do something to help the citizens of the city of Monte Sereno, I think we can include some folks from Saratoga and Los Gatos. And then finally, the other thing that we did in Monte Sereno was we had Silicon Valley Clean Energy do a presentation to the Youth Commission, and they're pretty influential. And I would encourage you to do that or consider doing that, having them involved. Thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for being here. If you just give them a card, then they'll have your name and number, which is perfect. And just for the record, Saratoga had a few more X's. We do our stuff quietly. I don't know. Okay, are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing none, it comes back to us for discussion. Does somebody want to take this one home? We'll start here with Tony.
I just have a relatively simple comment, which is I'm going to bridge my role here as being up on the dais tonight, but being a staff member in the trenches during the day. And I just want to tell the board that the SVCE staff has done an outstanding job on this program, and I have not seen John say no to a single request, both to me as an individual staff member in Morgan Hill. He's every time he's like, yes, we'll be there. Yes, we'll be there. Oh, I've even offered a phone option for him. He's like, no, we'll be there. You know, as well as at bigger meetings with other cities, he has just continually stressed that both SVCE staff as well as the consultants are available to come every time. So we now, if I can step back behind the dais, are doing a great job of serving our communities.
Excellent. And kudos to staff is what I heard. Okay, other comments? We'll go Rod and then Rico.
So one question I have is, you talked about buildings that are already in existence that have been electrified, making some publicity with that. Are there case studies for these buildings? Is something that would say, here's the positive benefit we've gotten, that, you know, we could point people in the development community to?
Yes. So as part of our All Electric Showcase Award initiative, we are putting together, and we have put together already, some attractive one-pagers that are describing what's happening at these buildings, who are the architect, who is the developer, what are the key systems, what are some of the key advantages.
Great, and where would one find those online?
We haven't put them online yet.
Okay.
Oh, there's 2 online? Thank you, Pamela Leonard. There are now 2 online. Yep, thank you.
What's the address? What's the URL?
How about if they send that out?
Yeah, it's on Silicon Valley Clean, it's svcleanenergy.org/all-electric-award.
And I think it's in the stuff we've just been handed to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
And then I want to add to that in addition to these early ones, we'll be continuing to develop more of these. We have 2 done, and we're working on more. Then that is going to be loaded up as we're developing our resource center to give a broader based support for this type of education and outreach.
And I think to the speaker's comment about, you know, the idea that electric could be more expensive than gas over time, you know, Panama Bartholomew in his talk gave a pretty compelling reason why that's not going to be the case. And I don't know how we might reinforce that, but talking about, you know, life cycle cost or operating cost, as well as initial cost in any material we could put out, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
May I make a comment
Sure,
on that?
please.
Thank you. Very well put, and absolutely that needs to happen. I think one of the things that we're coming across as we engage more and more on this is that there's a bit of an asymmetry between electric and gas. We can do the comparisons on a cost-by-cost basis, but there are some strict benefits that are on the electric side that simply are not going to be quantified in the same way. So building homes that don't require carbon monoxide detectors, building homes that don't increase asthma, COPD effects, the healthcare costs that likely are associated with combustion of fossil fuels in your home, there's not a quantification yet of that, but we do have information about things like incident rate. And so I agree that we absolutely want to make sure that we have apples to apples comparison, but there's a future that all electric can take us to that gas just in its current incarnation can't. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to figure out a way to thread that bit into it as well.
Okay, excellent. Next up is the city who was first in the county to adopt REACH codes in the 80s. Los Gatos adopted REACH codes for solar hot water plumbing. You required houses be pre-plumbed.
My council's
for solar.
leadership has changed since the 80s.
I just wanted to remind you that you were the
Please
first in the
remind that
county.
to many other people. I do want to clarify, SVCE staff has been incredible in responding to the requests that we have had. Unfortunately, I'm unable to get this onto the council for discussion. So if there are others in the audience who'd like to raise this to our council at a public hearing, I'd encourage that. And if I could just ask staff to put October 15 is when first reading will be. Thank you.
Again, the first city in the county to do REACH codes. We'll go Elahi, and then we'll come back to Smith.
To encourage Los Gatos to consider it, the Los Gatos Morning Rotary has invited John Sup to give us a presentation on the REACH codes. Hopefully you guys can join in or have some Los Gatos City Council. Rob is also a member of the Rotary, so hopefully he'll be there. So that'll be good. So that was my announcement, and also we look forward.
When will that be?
That's on October 2nd. It's on Wednesday at 7:30 a.m. at the Los Gatos Lodge.
Excellent. Oh, I was going to do Nancy,
Oh,
but
please
go ahead, Nancy.
Go right ahead.
I'll just briefly state that Sunnyvale is supportive of REACH codes. We do not have a date for a date yet, but we are. It's first and foremost in some of the work we're doing. But I'm afraid Mountain View might lap us on this one.
Oh, that'll be very rare.
I know, but what are you going to do? All right, thanks.
Excellent.
I was going to let it slide, but while I was out of town, I believe one of the committees, the Environmental Design Committee in Los Altos Hills, met and has formalized its recommendation. So I do expect this to make it to the council at some point. So I think we do deserve another X somewhere on this chart. And I just want to make sure I advocate for the appropriate Xing in Los Altos Hills' favor.
Any other comments? Seeing other comments? No, they're just, okay, so the summary is we all want more X's, and we're all doing what we can to have more X's, and we think staff is doing an exceptional job in helping our cities get those X's, and not everything is within our controls within our cities. Did I give you the right summary? Okay, then with that, we will move on to the next item. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item are some updates. Update from the Finance and Administration Committee. That would be me. We did in fact meet and we discussed the budget in great detail. We also discussed HR policies with PTO, which was item 1C on the consent agenda, and the expansion of the legal services contract, item 1G. And we set our next meeting for September 3rd. That's all I have from the Finance Committee. Any questions? Seeing none, item number 7, the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee. Who wants to report on that?
Thank you, Vice Chair. On July 9th, the Leg Ad Hoc Committee met to discuss priority bills and recent events in the 2019 legislative session. As you probably know, July 12th was the start of summer recess and the deadline for bills to pass through required policy committees in the second house. So the bills under discussion included those considering centralized procurement of particular concern to us, such as AB 56, as well as bills touching on integrated resource planning, CCA code of conduct, defining the provider of last resort, and diversity in CCA procurement. So we reviewed progress on the bills of interest, and thanks to our outreach and others' outreach to Senator Jerry Hill, he was a leader in opposing AB 56, which I understand is now gone. Is that a fair?
Right now, but
gone in
it's
current
going to come
form.
back in some form.
Yeah. So we will reconvene again on August 27th to consider what other actions we should take for the end of session, and we do expect to be calling on you to help us with advocacy. The end of session is September 13th, right, Hillary? So we will have about 2 weeks or so to make our voices heard on last-minute threats and other things. And as Girish sent out earlier, sometimes there are environmental advocacy groups that are generally well-intentioned, but we would urge our members to pay attention to the communications coming from CalCCA via SVCE on what bills to support. A lot of these are complex bills. There's a lot of subtleties, so thank you for that. And that concludes the report.
Great, thanks, Rod. Okay, moving right along, board member announcements and/or any direction on future agenda items.
Yeah, I just have one other announcement. September 7th, the Los Gatos Morning Rotary has a Clause for Cause. It's their annual fundraiser. They're expecting about 1,100 people. It's also going to be at the Los Gatos Lodge. If anybody wants more details, please contact me.
Excellent. Any other announcements? Tony?
I have an actual invitation. And I invite all of us to experiment with, if you don't already have one, with an induction cooktop. They are amazingly inexpensive. Assuming you don't already have a full induction cooktop at your house, as I don't. I have a gas stove, like most of us. But I went to Amazon.com and bought one, and now I get to sometimes cook with induction. And I think it's part of being in an all-electric home is using an induction cooktop, and it's a nice experience. It keeps us from burning natural gas in our kitchen where we're actually in close contact with the fumes. So I invite you all to do it as a way of kind of, it's a low-cost way of walking our talk.
So what night are you inviting us over for dinner?
I'm a no seafood person. No, I'm joking. I want to follow up with that, though, because I went to the discussion Panama made. I can't remember his last name. You mentioned Bartholomew. And during the discussion was furiously texting my husband, "Oh my God, get rid of that stove. We need an induction right away." The bummer is I honestly went home and made some calls, and I have a very large 8-burner, currently 6 burners with a griddle.
Which
and
shocks us all, by the way.
They don't make inductions big enough yet. So we need to.
You can get 2 or 3.
I'm making a big point here that we need to perhaps inspire some of the larger kitchen formats to also consider what that might look like.
Your REACH code is going to do that.
Yeah, well, I need a manufacturer to come on board that can fill the space.
Part of the changing the world is being first and creating demand, and that's what we're doing. Any other announcements? Go ahead, Nancy.
All this talk of food and cooking, and I don't know. Well, Sunnyvale cooked up something nice yesterday. And by the way, I cook daily on an induction stove.
Good job.
So every single day, and it works if you are old school. Iron skillets work great. So get out your Lodge cookware; it works fine. So okay. So I am happy to announce that yesterday the Sunnyvale City Council approved our Climate Action Plan 2.0. Some of the highlights are that we set it up as a playbook. So we have strategies, plays, and moves, and the idea is that the strategies will stick around a long time, but the plays and the moves will change as the situations change. So I'll just go over really briefly. Strategy number 1 is promoting clean energy, and our target is 100% by 2030, which we have achieved already, so yay. So 100% clean energy.
Well, that was an ambitious goal.
So we are yeah, I know, it's like.
It's a tough ground.
But we also added, with help and input from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, we added increased distributed electrical storage to our plan. So that would be 2% by 2030, and 5% by 2050. And I won't go through all of these, but I want to hit the top 3 at least. Our second strategy is decarbonizing buildings. And we have, I think it looks like 3 plays for decarbonizing buildings. So that's fabulous news.
And you will send all of us the URL so we can see all this
I will
in detail,
absolutely
right?
do that to the final version.
Thank you.
And we did great. And our third strategy is decarbonizing transportation and sustainable land use.
That's harder.
So EVs, falls into that. And
excellent.
And then strategy 4 is managing resources sustainably. So that would be things like zero waste and resiliency of various kinds, and awareness of sustainable goods and services. 5 is empowering our community, and 6 is adapting to changing climate. So I'm happy. I will, through the staff, I will send a link to the final version when it's released.
It would be very helpful. I heard rumor that not every city has a climate action plan yet.
Ours was years in the making, cast of thousands, and seriously, we really took it seriously and got a lot of community input, and it's
and we will steal any good idea that fits our city.
We will be glad to be copied.
Okay, are there any other announcements? And with that, we're adjourned so we can run to the doors.
Hallelujah.